Good morning everybody, welcome to Indycar. This morning we discover that we're on the brink of another war. It seems that both the British and Americans and even the French have decided in advance, it seems, that it is a good idea to try and attack Syria, and by dint of attacking Syria, to attack Russia. Now where's all this come from? What's going on? Why have we suddenly ended up on the brink, teetering on the brink of a hot war, a shooting war between the West on one side and Russia on the other? Because this isn't about Syria, it's not about the Skripals being poisoned, it's not about chemical weapons, it's not about any of that. It's about one side of the world wanting to have a war with the other side of the world because of oil, effectively. The whole thing is about the dollar. It's about the petrodollar. Recently the Russians and the Chinese agreed that they would start doing deals on oil, selling and buying oil, exchanging oil in yen, in Chinese currency, no longer using the dollar. This has completely spooked the West. It's spooked the Americans particularly, whose entire currency is, to some extent at least, given its value by the fact that everybody in the world uses their currency to trade oil, and a large amount of the dollar's value is based on that. It seems oddly coincidental that as soon as the Chinese and the Russians agreed to do this deal to trade their oil in Chinese yen, that suddenly there's an attack on a Russian double agent in the United Kingdom, which provokes a vicious backlash against Russia, even though there's no proof that the Russians did any of it. The witnesses, or the actual victims of this alleged poisoning, are not allowed to speak publicly. They're not allowed to be seen on television. Statements are issued through Whitehall, through the British government, from the people who have supposedly been poisoned by the supposed Russian chemical, which supposedly was ordered by Russia. So first of all, we've got that suddenly happen. So this cranks up the rhetoric. The Russians are to blame, the Russians are bad. And then all of a sudden we have 30 seconds of video of a bunch of men in a room hosing down children who appear to be suffering from the effects of tear gas. And this, we are told or asked to believe, is evidence of a chemical attack in Douma, in Syria, and carried out by the Syrian army, or the Syrian army loyal to Assad. All of this strains your credulity. You're being asked to believe all of this based on such flimsy evidence. Not even evidence, this is just concocted by the media. These are staged events. This morning on Radio Scotland, Gary Robertson, who's a reasonably good interviewer, had on his show as a guest the former ambassador to Syria. Now, who better than the former ambassador, British ambassador to Syria, to get under the skin of these events in Syria and to actually analyse them properly. And this man, contrary to everything that I was expecting him to say, having been an employee of the British state abroad in the diplomatic service, came out and said quite plainly that he believed that the events that we saw in Syria, this so-called chemical attack, was entirely staged by a jihadist group known as the White Helmets, who are to some degree even linked to the CIA, because there are several jihadist groups which are linked to America, and which America uses as actors in the Middle East to provoke discontent, to provoke outbreaks of fighting. So this British diplomat, who's now retired incidentally, but a British diplomat, is now saying that he believes that we're being led to the brink of war based on 30 seconds of faked news, basically faked news. And he's pointing out that the fact that the British media has repeatedly over and over and over again shown this video to us has reinforced and given this 30-second fake news item a kind of credibility that it doesn't deserve. The other interesting thing I was hearing today from another source is that Theresa May, apparently, and I'm hearing this from good sources, has already ordered British nuclear submarines to position themselves within missile range of the Syrian capital, Damascus. Now that means they're entering the eastern Mediterranean submerged. Now this is a nuclear submarine, attack submarine with Trident missiles on board, presumably. Why would the British Prime Minister order a nuclear-armed submarine to the eastern Mediterranean within missile range of Syria, unless they were expecting this war that they're provoking to suddenly escalate out of control? It's a backstop. Remember, the British submarines are a deterrent. They are to deter a nuclear strike against the West. That's the purpose of them. And they are moving these pieces into position as we speak. Somebody said that they felt that we're on the brink of a nuclear war. The Russians, the news agency in Russia, has been putting out statements from its Ministry of Defence saying there is now an 80% chance of a major war with America. 80%. This is coming from the Russian military. 80%. Have the Russians provoked this or not? Well, the answer to this is obviously no, they haven't, because neither Russia would benefit from provoking a war, and neither would Assad benefit from using a chemical weapon when he had already won the battle to take Douma back. The Syrian army, which is loyal to Assad, the actual forces which are in charge of Syria, the legitimate forces of the army of Assad's administration, they have won the battle. They've been winning the battle for the last year, and they're about to really conclude a victory in this civil war and bring it to a close. Why on earth would Assad drop a chemical weapon in full view of the West, causing children all this suffering? Why would he do that? Because he would basically be destroying his victory. And this was the point that the British former ambassador was making this morning on Good Morning Scotland when he was talking to Gary Robertson. I think Gary Robertson was genuinely surprised at the candid nature of the interview which was given by this ambassador. He was being entirely truthful, and he pointed out that even a child could work out why these events were being staged and who would benefit from them. They were so transparent that a child could work out that this was a provocation, and it was going to be used as an excuse for America, Britain and France to attack Syria, and not just stop at Syria. They're also heading towards Iran. Iran's the next target, and that's really the end game here, is attack Russia, get into Iran as well. They are trying desperately to turn Russia into some kind of monster that must be put back in its box, that must be fronted down. The real problems in the world which are causing this are nothing to do with Russia. They're all to do with the fact that the Western capitalist system has hit the buffers now, and they have run out of money. They have lost their own battle, if you like, their own capitalist battle to make as much money as possible, because China has now won it. China has now got the biggest economy on the planet. They have all the money, they have all the production means. America is now going protectionist under Trump. Britain is going protectionist under May, leaving the EU. The whole of the Western economical system is falling to bits. And the only way that these leaders in the West can find to get themselves out of the political problems that they're in is to have a war to distract everybody's attention away from the mess that the West has got itself into. So we are on the brink of a major conflict. Make no mistake about it. The next thing that happens, what happens tomorrow in the next few days, is going to be critical. And yet the British public is being kept largely in the dark about the dangers of this. They don't seem to realise how close to the brink of a nuclear exchange that we're actually coming. When our own Prime Minister is ordering nuclear submarines into the Eastern Mediterranean, the Americans have moved their fleet to the Eastern Mediterranean and they are ready to strike. Russian fighters have in the last 24 hours been buzzing, low-flying over the American fleet in the Eastern Mediterranean. There's a big standoff coming up, and whoever blinks first is going to start a conflict. Something bad will happen. The Russians are worried about this. They've issued warnings that they will shoot down missiles fired into Syria. They will probably shoot down American planes as well. They will certainly retaliate if any of the American missiles kill any Russian soldiers. And there are thousands of Russian soldiers involved on the ground in Syria. They're embedded in the air defence system in Syria, and they man the air defence system which would shoot down these missiles. In any attack from America, the first thing the Americans would do is take out the anti-missile systems. That means they would attack the Russians first. So this is why it's dangerous. And I hope you understand why I'm taking a more serious tone this morning. This is not something I take lightly, and I don't think it's anything that anybody in their right mind takes lightly. We're standing on the brink of another major war which could escalate out of control in the Middle East, all to benefit the egos of Donald Trump, Theresa May and Macron in France, all to get them out of the problems they have at home. It is nothing at all to do with Syria, it's nothing to do with Assad, and there's not been any chemical weapons attack I can see. All I saw in that clip that we saw on the television were children suffering from the effects of being pepper sprayed or tear gassed. Remember, tear gas, although you wouldn't think it, tear gas is actually a chemical weapon anyway itself, and yet it's used all over the world every day. Nobody bats an eyelid about that. But it can make the same kind of symptoms that you would see in a chlorine gas attack: eyes streaming, mouth foaming, noses running, unable to breathe properly. That can easily be simulated, and what we saw on that 30-second clip was absolutely proof of nothing at all. And yet we're going to war on the basis of 30 seconds of fake news. I think we all need to think about that, and we all need to start contacting our MPs, and particularly contacting the British government and telling them to back off, call off the dogs of war, and take a step back, take a deep breath and let it out slowly, and stop being so bloody stupid. I'm off. See you later. If we survive this, I'm heading up to the Highlands, I think, if it looks like war. I'm going to get as far away from Faslane as possible. Anybody who lives in Faslane or nearby, I would consider taking a long holiday sometime in the next 2 weeks perhaps. If things get bad, then you want to be as far away from the west coast of Scotland as possible. Bye.